All right, everybody, I'd like to welcome to the December 6th regular council meeting for the city of Courtenay. And just want to start by respectfully acknowledging the land on which we gather is the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, and we appreciate them welcoming us here. I'm going to start tonight by acknowledging one of our longtime employees, Jennifer Nelson, who is our Director of Finance. This is her last meeting. Jennifer's been with the city since 2003 and started as a finance clerk and worked her way up as finance manager and then manager of financial planning, and then was the acting director for quite some time, and then finally became the director of finance. And so in her 18 years at the city has not only had a significant impact on our organization at the city, but I would say a very positive impact. And I look back at the years that I've been able to work with her over the last 7 years, and she's been very accessible in terms of being able to get information. And I even recall her working with counselors when, you're dealing with complex mathematical equations or how we come up with certain numbers, mill rates, et cetera, or even how we're contemplating taxes, et cetera. And she's always been great at being able to articulate what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then if given direction to be able to bob and weave and operationalize what the council will is. So I just really want to thank Jennifer Nelson for her amazing service to the city, and on behalf of the city and council, just wish you all the best in the future. So, and yeah, thanks. Yeah, we can talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I just wondered if I could say something too. I've just really enjoyed my time working at the city over the last 18 years, and I'm really grateful for all the opportunities that I've had along the way. It's allowed me to grow and in my career, and I feel like I've gained some very valuable experience, and just been a pleasure working with Mayor and Council. And I look forward to working with some of you in the future as I move on to my new role at the regional district. So once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate those kind words. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, and again, all the best. And again, we're going to be seeing you on a regular basis, I'm sure, and especially staff from the city will be talking to you fairly regularly. Next, we're actually going to vary our agenda, and I'll have Councillor Hillian. Your mic is lit. If you'd like to do the varying.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a fairly lengthy motion, but I will read it out in case there's anyone following along at home. I move that Council vary the order of the December 6th, 2021 Council agenda, so the following items are considered before item 4.11, which is the Earl Naswell Community Dinner. Under staff, item step 4, staff reports, presentations, and item 4.1, recreation, culture, and community services. And the items are as follows. Item 4.31, release of covenant restricting secondary suite 2948 Cascara Crescent. Item 4.3.2, updated proposal development permit with variances number 2107 1600 Riverside Lane. Item 12.21, zoning amendment bylaw number 3021 2021 regarding 2099 Hawk Drive for third reading. Item 12.22, zoning amendment bylaw number 3043 2021 re 1544 Dingwall Road for third reading. Item 12.31, zoning amendment bylaw number 3021 2021 2099 Hawk Drive for final adoption. And item 12.32, zoning amendment bylaw number 3043 2021 1544 Dingwall Road for final adoption.
Excellent. Moved by Councillor Hillian, seconded by Councillor Frisch. Much appreciated. And for those that are listening out there, this is going to allow us to have a much tighter agenda so that we can deal with our development services all together, and also allow people that have to leave early to be able to do that. So with that, we'll move into our regular agenda with the adoption of minutes. Oh, I should take the vote. Thank you so much. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thanks very much.
Move adoption of November 29th and December 3rd council minutes.
Excellent. It's been moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And any introduction of late items? And seeing none, we'll go into delegations. And tonight we do have the Comox Valley Project Watershed Society talking to us about the Kuskusum restoration project. And we've got Caitlin, Jennifer, and Tim. They're joining us via Zoom. So I'll pass it over to you guys to introduce yourselves maybe a little bit more fully if you need to, and present your delegation. Oh, yeah. And there's, yeah, when you want it to go to the next slide, just say slide and we'll make that magically happen for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. My name is Caitlin Perchelski, and I'm the Executive Director of Project Watershed. And I'm joined today by Jennifer Suthurst, our Senior Staff Biologist, and Tim Innes, our Senior Advisor to the project, Kuskusum. I think we can skip to the next slide here. Oh dear, the formatting seems to have not transitioned super well here. But I will say that we managed to purchase and transfer the land of Kuskusum earlier this year at the end of February. And that transfer was completed in a Bear Trust agreement between our three partners, which is Project Watershed, the City of Courtenay, and Comox First Nation. So Project Watershed is now holding the property in trust for the two beneficiaries, which are, of course, Comox First Nation and the City of Courtenay. And I'm just going to look at my slides here so that I can just make sure I'm not missing anything, because it seems like the text has gotten lost in translation there. But one of the big important pieces that we still need to speak about a little bit more in the future is some of the land acquisition negotiation and documents will still need to be finalized. And one of the things we will be doing is we will be hosting a partner meeting January 10th of 2022 to further these conversations. So if you are one of the folks contributing to these conversations, whether it be elected council or staff, please let me know so that we can include you in the invite for that conversation. And at this point, I will actually be able to hand it over to Jennifer Suthurst, our Senior Staff Biologist. She'll be talking more about the restoration of the project and all the work that's happened so far this year. Take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you, Caitlin. Next slide. So I think most of you are probably familiar with the overall restoration goals for the site, but we want to renaturalize the shoreline and reconnect it to the Courtenay River. That's our foremost goal. In order to do that, we'll have to regrade and recontour the site and create elevations on the site that will be suitable for supporting various vegetative communities in order to create functional off-channel habitat for salmon and other wildlife. And I think one of the designs that we presented to council originally, we showed a tidal connection between Kuskusum and the Hollyhock Marsh Conservation Area. And in terms of an update on that, we did look at the Courtenay force main, the sewer main that runs under the Courtenay River and actually right in between the two sites. And we had some testing done and we looked at the elevation of that pipe, and it's actually closer to the surface than we thought, which meant that crossing that pipe would be obviously expensive, it would be risky, and then for the habitat gain that you'd get, there actually wouldn't be that much because the connection, that channel between the two sites would only flow at the highest of tides. So we're no longer doing that idea, but we have designed the restoration design in such a way that it supports that connection later in the future if at some point that infrastructure is upgraded and they're able to lower that sewer pipe. So in lieu of that, what we've come up with is basically a connection of some of the existing Hollyhock channels back into the Courtenay River. And we have air photos, historic air photos that show that these channels actually at one time did connect to the Courtenay River. And that way fish that are transiting up through Hollyhock Marsh can actually get into the Courtenay River and then get into the Kuskusum site. Next slide. So the restoration is planned in 3 distinct phases. This was year 1 that we just completed, which was the hard surface removal at the site. So that was removing the concrete and asphalt from the site, crushing it up, and then trucking it off of the site. Next year is the major earthworks. So that will be the excavation at the site, recontouring the site, and starting to plant it in the fall. And then the final phase of the restoration, we envision finishing up all the rest of the planting, doing some habitat complexing work, and then the final task to do will be removing the steel pile wall so that we'll have the site connected to the Courtenay River. Slide. This is a model that was done by Northwest Hydraulic Consultants, and they're the lead engineer on the project. And I think if you hit next slide, then you should see the model start to work. So it's basically been a really great visual aid for us. If we could go back to that slide, that basically shows how the restored site will respond under, various sort of flood levels, river flood levels, as well as various tide levels. So it shows the existing conditions, and then when you run the model, you can actually see the blue dot goes and it shows you the river elevations, and the red dot shows the tidal elevation. So it doesn't seem to be running for us right now, but if Mayor and Council are interested in getting that, we can send it to you for your viewing pleasure. So next slide. So this year, as I said, we worked on completing the hard surface removal from the 8.3 acre site. There was a lot more concrete on the site than we anticipated. So that work did take longer than we thought it would, and there's still more to be removed. We crushed the concrete on site, and then it's been repurposed for projects throughout the valley. Next slide. In preparation for this work, earlier in the spring, you probably noticed that we did demolish the old office building on the site. We also disconnected the power. We had Terra West Environmental Consultants out, and they did some test digs around the site to look at the soil conditions, and they developed a soil management plan for us. And we also had GeoScan out with their ground penetrating radar, and they just located all the subsurface utilities for us, electrical conduits, water pipes, that kind of thing. Slide. So then we got into the business of breaking the concrete and crushing it up. So those of you, I'm sure, that drove by the site saw us busy at work there this summer. Current Environmental developed a construction environmental management plan for us. And that was really important as a nonprofit environmental organization. Of course, we want to follow the best management practices possible and make sure that we're protecting the environment at all times. So Current also helped us out actually measuring water quality every day at the site. And then the Comox First Nation Guardians were out as well, and they did environmental monitoring for us as well as archaeological monitoring. Next slide. So this is just an action shot of the materials being sorted into piles on the site. So we had large piles of concrete and asphalt, and you can't see the large piles of rebar that we had, but it was really important for us to repurpose or recycle all the materials that came off of the site. So all the rebar was recycled, and all the concrete was crushed and repurposed, and the asphalt as well went up to TACO paving, and that was repurposed for road construction. Next. So here you just see the large windrows of material that we produced through the crushing of the concrete. And we had almost 9,000 cubic meters that were produced of crushed concrete. We originally estimated there'd be about 6,000 cubic meters coming out of the site. And we estimate that we have about 3,000 more still to come out of the site. So we did have Lukowich Engineering out, and they provided in-kind services to the project. They came out and they certified this crushed material as a 3-inch minus, which was suitable for construction fill essentially. So it went to development projects in the valley for fill and also for road base for roads as well. Next slide. So you might have noticed all the trucks going to and from the site at the end of September. We had 750 double truckloads of material come off the site and about 100 single truckloads, and we accomplished that in just a little over 5 days. So things went really smoothly. Next slide. And if this can play, if you can hit advance, it should play. This is just a little promotional video that we did of all the work that took place at the site this year. Looks like it slowed down a bit there.
Was there audio as well that needs to be playing, or is it okay?
No, it's fine. I think there's some music, but it's fine. It doesn't add anything to it. There's no actual voiceover or anything like that.
But we need to donate.
Yes. Well, I said it's a promotional video. We always got to get that message out there. All right,
Absolutely.
Next slide. Yeah, you can just go to the next slide. Thanks. So this is the Earthworks. This is a sneak peek of what's planned for year 2. So as I mentioned, this will be the earthworks where we're doing all the excavating. We'll be going down to grade to create tidal channels throughout the site. We'll be creating other elevations that support salt marsh plants, benches, and upper terrestrial platforms as well. And then there'll be a huge push to replant towards the end of the fall. We have a planting prescription that was developed for us by Corolla Consulting, and we have another partner environmental Milestone Environmental that's having a look at that and just giving input on it as well. We're doing a community engagement session with the Comox First Nation coming up, getting their input on the planting prescription and seeing if there are any culturally significant plants that they'd like to see included that we've missed, or if there's something culturally significant, maybe they want us to plant more of that species. Next slide, I think. Oh, yeah, this is my last one. So year 3, the final phase will be the full revegetation of the site, as well as habitat complexing work, installing features in the channels like large woody debris and boulder complexes, creating amphibian ponds and planting, and then finally removing the sheet piling wall. And that will be done on the terrestrial side, the land side, and it'll be done in phases. And then I think I'll hand it back to Caitlin now, and she'll talk on the next slide about funding.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. So the total budget for the project is about 5.5 million. Year 1, we did great for funding, and we secured $1.4 million for funding. And that was a combination of grants, community donations, business donations, etc. And then for year 2, the budget's quite a bit bigger. Earthworks is a very expensive undertaking, as well as planting. So that kind of accounts for the significant jump in the budget there. And then year 3, because it was just a lot of habitat complexing, some additional plantings, and basically ensuring that the site is stable and ready for the wall removal, that budget is looking a little bit smaller for year 3. So year 1, we received lots of grants, which was great. We got the BC Salmon Restoration Innovation Fund, the Healthy Watersheds Initiative, which is provincial funding. We got Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program funding, Habitat Compensation Trust Fund funding, Pacific Salmon Foundation funding, and some funding from World Wildlife Foundation as well, plus an extensive number of community donations, which is great. So all of the names there that I have in black, that means that we have successfully secured that funding. So all the ones that you'll see for year 2 and year 3 that are in red, that means that those funding sources are still pending. So again, in year 2, we did an extensive granting push, and we're still in the middle of that. Some of those various funders are here below. One of the things that we would like to pursue further is potentially looking at the UBCM gas tax funding for brownfield redevelopment for either year 2 or year 3. And so as you can see here, the potential deficit for year 2 is quite significant. We've secured $850,000, and we still need to confirm an additional 2.45 million. If we do confirm all of the funders that you see here in red for year 2, that will bump up that total to only needing to confirm a little over 1 million. But as you can see, there's still a significant gap for funding here. One of the things we can do if we do come up a little bit short for year 2 is we can spread some of the work into year 3 and still come up successful. So since the budget for year 3 is a little bit smaller, that gives us a little bit of wiggle room to move some of the work into year 3 and just spread around some of that work so we can balance the budget a little bit more easily. Perfect. Next slide. Right on. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time to invite us and listen to our presentation today. Does anyone have any questions that we could answer at this point?
Thanks very much for the presentation. And I do have a question or comment from Councillor Hillian.
Thanks very much, Mayor, and thanks to Caitlin, Jennifer, and Tim. Of course, I've been intimately involved in this project as a council representative since 2015, and so pleased to see it come to this stage, and optimistic about the ongoing work to be done. My two questions, one is with regards to the archaeological work that you had the supervision of the Guardians. I'm curious whether there were any archaeological remains that have been discovered thus far as the concrete was being removed.
No, there weren't any archaeological or culturally significant artifacts found on the site, and we expected that because the site's largely fill. We weren't really excavating down to the native ground in this first phase, but just with an abundance of caution, every time that we did have the excavator out digging, just in case, we had guardian supervision, just to have that set of eyes to look for any shell midden or bone or other artifacts.
Right, thanks. And second question, I appreciate that you've got a plan that you've charted out over a 3-year period. Is there a particular reason why you need it to be 3 years, given the significant amount of money that needs to be raised for the redevelopment? Is it possible that you would stretch it over more than 3 years?
Yeah, I don't see anything that would necessarily stop us from stretching out the timeline. We did want to, turn around the project in a timely fashion and really kind of stick to those original deliverables that we've set, especially with our funders. So a lot of our big funders, we've set specific timelines and we would like to deliver on those. Having said that, I think they're understanding for the most part if we communicate with them in advance about changing ideas, but we do have to still deliver on basically our commitments to those funders.
Thanks very much. And I hope to be able to have a further conversation with you when the partners next meet with regards to brownfield applications. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Doug.
Excellent. And we have Councillor, Councillor McCullough.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you very much for the presentation. It's always so great to see an update on Couscoussum and where the project's at. It's been continuous good news throughout my term, and I just want to congratulate you all for where we've gotten to thus far. I had a question about the $1 million shortfall for, I assume year 2 is 2022. I know that the provincial government has been a fairly good partner when it came to the initial phase of this project, and that our community was hoping to see some funding come through from the federal government. And to my knowledge, we have not seen a contribution thus far. And I know our MP was working towards seeing a commitment from our highest level of government. And I'm wondering if that engagement's still happening and if there is a hope that maybe we'll see something come through in the coming year.
Yeah, great question. So we haven't seen anything confirmed as a direct give from the federal government. Having said that, we have been successful on some federal grants. So there is federal money coming towards the project. It's just not in the form of a direct give. And maybe, Tim, could I pass it over to you to give a little bit more context to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Caitlin, and hello, everybody. Yeah, it's a delicate question to answer because we have some tentative information about federal funding that's not eligible to be sort of publicly spoken to just yet, but we have every indication that the federal government will be stepping up to help with this project, but in a significant fashion. But there still remains the outstanding gap that Caitlin identified, and our focused efforts right now are on filling that gap. So yeah. But yeah, Gord Johns has been a tremendous supporter and ally of this project, and we're happy to have the federal government on side.
Thanks for that. It sounds like there's some hope of some good news coming on that front. So thanks for sharing what you're able to. The other question I had just is around the community donations piece. And, it's hard to kind of get a sense of what can be expected in terms of community commitment, especially because there's been so much of it over the years. And just curious to know if there is, what the project has traditionally seen from kind of smaller community donations is already accounted for in that shortfall, or if there has consistently been ongoing funds coming through in the more recent months. Just if you wanted to comment on that as well.
Yeah, so there has been ongoing funds coming in from those community supporters, which is incredible. What I've included there is basically what's been confirmed so far. So that just includes donations received to date. rather than any sort of prospect of potential donations. So as we kind of continue into year 2, I anticipate that that gap will close slightly, but not potentially in the $1 million way we need it to.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum and Councillor Theos.
Appreciate it, Mayor. Thank you. And thanks for the presentation. It looks like it's coming along very nicely. Congratulations. I was going to ask you a few questions. One, as in terms of as the project moves along, we've talked about contamination potential and the fact that there's been some ongoing assurances that have mitigated that possibility. As the project continues to proceed, how do we ensure that that is mitigated as in terms of contamination potential?
I can handle that one if you want.
Perfect.
Caitlin.
Go ahead, Jennifer. Yeah.
So we've had Terra West Environmental working with us, developing a soil management plan. So they've been on site a few times doing soil testing. The initial testing showed a couple areas of concern with spikes in hydrocarbons, and then the other contaminant of concern was some high arsenic levels. But the interesting thing is there's no actual background data on what the naturally occurring arsenic levels are for our area. And recently the province has kind of lowered the acceptable threshold or standard for how much arsenic you can have in your soils. So what we did is we did some further investigation based on that. The hydrocarbon story, it was good news. Basically, the hydrocarbons we have on site are from wood waste that's decomposing, so organic sources rather than inorganic. So that was great news. And then the arsenic, what we're doing is we're trying to find an area of native soil, which is hard to do, as you could probably appreciate given all the disturbances in the valley, that's close by the site where we can dig down, get to that native soil and test it and compare it to Couscous and try to make that case that if we have about the same arsenic levels that basically it's a naturally occurring source of arsenic and it's not something from industrial uses. And when you actually go back to the background reports and what was happening on the site and the chemicals that were used, we don't see arsenic. So we suspect that it's a natural source, but you never know. But we will have a soil management plan basically that says, if you have arsenic and it's leaving the site soils with arsenic, it's got to go to this treatment facility to be taken care of. We can reuse those soils on site without any problem. It's as soon as anything gets moved off site, if it has contaminants in it, it has to go to the appropriate facility. And that's how we'll handle it. We'll have somebody actually on site, a specialist, looking at the soils and testing and making sure that the soil is going to the right place for disposal if needed.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you. And thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity for another question. Yeah, a few years ago, there was, quite a few years ago now, there was a really neat idea, kind of a public-private partnership. And the idea was to offer a water taxi service from the area there to Comox and back. I was wondering, as in terms of a partnership like that in the future, do you see that as a possibility or something along those lines, economic development wise?
I would say that is maybe outside of Project Watershed's scope. Our main role in the project is really to restore the property. I think if you were looking to have a better answer for something like that it might be better to look towards our two other partners, Comox First Nation and City of Courtenay, to see if that is something that's of interest to them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Theos. And I think you know people at the City of Courtenay, so great questions. Councillor Billion.
Thanks, Mayor. I will comment on Councillor Theos's question. The intent from the start of this project has been to, as much as possible, return this land to its pre-colonial state, to provide a natural habitat for plant and wildlife. And along with that intent, the eventual ownership will fully transfer to the Comox First Nation. That's the basis on which the money has been raised for the project. And so, of course, that doesn't contemplate any development of any sort. It rather contemplates processes and I was going to use the word covenant, but perhaps I'll avoid that. The plan is that there will be procedures in place that will in fact present or prevent future development and preserve it in its integrity for the future, similar to the area that it's adjacent to, Hollyhock Marsh. So I hope that's of some help. And I would suggest that there's plenty of other areas closer to the headwaters or the marina and such that that could serve as a launching spot for a water taxi. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Hilling, for clarifying that and providing a little bit more context for the project. And I don't see any further speakers, but it is, again, just to reiterate, it's great to see where this project is at this point. I still recall Jack Menard inviting me out for lunch one day to meet Tim, who had this idea, and not just him, but I mean, this idea of restoring this land, which seemed insurmountable at the time. And Tim's like, yeah, well, I already did it once in Campbell River, so it's all good. And then working with Jennifer and Caitlin over Project Watershed, just seeing how everybody is so passionate about it, and the board of directors, the volunteers, it's been absolutely amazing. And I believe it was about a year ago right now when I got a random phone call from Kayla Vorster to see if we could do a live stream telethon like 2 days later. And we did that. And I think we raised it seemed like a lot of money, like 90 grand or something like that. I don't know. But what I was going to say, you've got the donation button there. But are you guys thinking of possibly doing another telethon? It seemed to be relatively successful, but I don't know if that's something that's in your sights at this point.
I don't think we have one in the calendar, but maybe I can talk with Kayla and see if it's an option.
There you go. And again, I think it was a great time, and obviously it's great to have. Was it an angel or something, a fairy angel or somebody that was
the estuary angel.
Estuary angel, yeah. So again, when you talk about our community, absolutely great commitment. I have one technical question, and that's just, it seems like a lot of the work that we're talking about here, it's happening behind the piling, so it's somewhat non-disturbing. But when those pilings start to come out, is that going to have to line up with certain windows? Like I assume it being a river with salmon and those kinds of things, is that going to limit the times a year that you're even going to be able to do that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have to work within the fish window, and maybe Jennifer, do you want to jump in a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll have to. You're absolutely right. We will have to work within the fish window. And so, so we'll be limited when we can do that work. And our plan is also to do it in phases, so not take it all out at once. And that way we can control more the water as it moves into the site and possible sediment from that. And I like to tell everybody, though, we've got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, and there probably will be a little bit of sediment that goes into the river once we reconnect, but we're going to try and minimize and control that as much as possible.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I just again want to thank you guys so much for your presentation today. And just another shout out for people to go out and donate to this project, which again is going to be in the heart of our community. So thanks again for all your work.
Thank you so much for having us.
Okay. And I think this is when we're going to start bearing the agenda a little bit. So next on the agenda, we have item 4.3, I believe, 4.3.1. If somebody could move that.
Sorry.
Councillor Frisch got you by that much.
I'll move that based on the December 6th, 2021 staff report, release of covenant restricting secondary suite 2948 Cascara Crescent. Council approve option 1 and direct staff to release covenant CA 2451158 from lot 7, district lot 236, Comox district plan EPP 17584.
Excellent. Moved by Councillor Frisch, seconded by Councillor McCollum, and I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Aceta, or I believe our acting director right now.
Good afternoon.
Good
Can you hear
afternoon. I'm passing it over to you. I know we don't have our CAO today, so I'm giving it directly to you. And I would have just said Tats, but it's, you know,
Yes.
Mr. Seta is a little more formal.
Yes.
And so do you have anything that you want to speak to, or do you want to?
I was seeing myself. Sorry, I wasn't seeing myself, so wasn't sure when it starts. So thank you through acting CAO to Mayor Council. The item in front of you is the request for release of covenant restricting secondary suites at the location of 2948 Cascara Crescent. As directed, staff mailed out the immediate neighbors asking their feedback on this request, regarding this request. We have last no response from one of the neighbors there, which support the release. So the total number of 4 support and 4 oppose, and so there's a mixed feeling about this request, but mainly the opposed side is concerned about the changing the neighborhood, and also parking and potential traffic issue in the neighborhood. And also the one opponent mentioned that the covenant should be held. So thanks for all the respondent, all the comments. So the staff recommendation to support this request, because the request is aligned with the current OCP policy, as well as alignment with the RGS. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thanks so much, Mr. Shredder, for that. And first we have Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. You know, this isn't a plebiscite where the majority of residents in the neighborhood cast a deciding vote. It's a council policy issue. But nonetheless, we ask for information, and we inform the community so that we can hear what people have to say and pay some attention to it. So it is interesting to note that we receive 3 people who actually support this application, 3 who I would say are adamantly opposed, and 1 who I believe has a conditional support, and that speaks to not wanting any suites that are brought in to be used for Airbnb purposes, and preferring that suites be occupied by family members. So I have 2 questions. The first is in relation to the Airbnb issue, and whether we have anything in place right now that would in fact prevent Airbnb usage in a neighborhood like this. That's my first question. And my second question, one of the people who expressed opposition spoke about the challenge in the neighborhood related to street trees that apparently are owned by the city, that where the roots are disturbing their property. And I'm wondering if perhaps our public works people might want to speak to that issue, please. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Seta, if you'd like to respond.
Thank you. Thank you through acting CEO to Mayor and Council. Regarding the Airbnb issues, currently the city doesn't have a regulation or policy set to regulate the Airbnb. But expectation is that the always owner occupied so the unit or residence enduring is always being kept in the good state. So the future planning will set up the detailed regulation regarding the Airbnb. But currently, city doesn't have Airbnb, so it's a little bit difficult to say what measures to be set for this particular location.
So what you're saying is that we don't have any prohibitions related to Airbnb right now, but we could, in fact, in the future, regulate that sort of usage?
Yes, that's correct. So when we discuss the policy, that will be the one of the topic we can definitely discuss.
Okay, thanks. And with regards to the tree issue, do we have public service staff available? Public works, rather?
Okay. Ms. O'Connor.
Thank you, Councillor Hillian, for your question. Although we do have the Director of Public Works here, it's not a question we're able to answer on the spot. So it's something we can endeavor to provide council with information a bit later this week if that's suitable.
Thanks very much. Of course, it's a side issue to what we're trying to determine today, but oftentimes we do find that things come up through these processes that are worthy of further explanation. And I think that if the description of the problem is as it was presented, then it's certainly worth us looking into it. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Just briefly, I am happy to support the removal of this covenant, basically in favor of getting more affordable housing and opening opportunities for people in that neighborhood to have more affordable housing in general. And I was also going to suggest that we pass along this particular letter regarding the tree issue to someone else in the city to deal with it, see if there's an opportunity there to fix that situation, but I'll leave that with staff. Thanks.
So thanks, Councillor Frisch. Sorry, Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. And I was going to bring up the tree issue as well, so I'll skip that. Just wanted to point out that if we decide to go ahead with this, we don't tend to micromanage how something is utilized in terms of the tenant that's going to be in the space. And I thought it was interesting, some of the feedback about wanting to really kind of control how the space is being used, and a comment about even not having a kitchen. I just thought it was interesting that if there was a family member in there that they would be expected to eat or to use the kitchen in the main house, whereas I think a secondary suite, the point of it is to have a separate living space. I also noted that I think there was one person who said that there were already secondary suites on the street. And I guess I'm thinking that either some of them are illegal or not, but we haven't really heard any feedback around any complaints in the neighborhood about illegal suites. So I just wondered if there was anything that staff could say about that, because it sounds like there hasn't been an issue that we have on record around that.
Thank you. Thank you to acting CEO to Mayor Council. Yes, we do have one. We did have one application last year around this time of the year. In December, the identical application for the location 2977 Cascara Crescent that was discussed last year, December 9th council meetings. That was approved and council supported. So there is one legitimate suites exist in the neighborhood, and yes, so that's one case exists. There was mentioned that illegal suites in that area, but location wasn't identified, and also I'm not aware of any public nuisance in that neighborhood. So I'm not aware of the major issue regarding the illegal basement suites.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I do recall the other one that was approved, but I think someone mentioned there were suites plural. And I just wanted to point out that to my knowledge, and perhaps another staff member can point to or speak to that, but to my knowledge, there hasn't been any formal complaint around any, adverse activity regarding secondary suites in that area.
Ms. O'Connell?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Thank you, Councillor. We don't typically tend to receive complaints regarding secondary suites because there's always a question as to the legality or illegality of those suites. It's typically something that's unbeknownst to the neighbors themselves. Historically, issues really arise around parking. So it's not until you meet a threshold where you're starting to see conflicts in parking that the issue of an illegal secondary suite might come to our attention. As far as I know from my bylaw team, parking within this area is not on our radar as an area of concern. So I can't speak to the impact of the suites, but usually that's where we see it manifesting itself, is literally on the street.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moore. And I don't see any further questions or comments at this point. So we do have a motion on the table. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. All right. Next, we have the updated proposal for number 2107, 1600 Riverside Lane. Right. Okay. Councillor Cole Hamilton moved receipt with Councillor Frisch seconding, and I will pass it over to staff. Mr. Seta.
Thank you, Sir Acting CEO, to Mayor Council. The item in front of you is the updated proposal of development permit with variance number 2107, 1600 Riverside Lane. This item was discussed at the council meeting, November 15th council meeting, and council deferred making decision on proposal and requested the four additional information in this proposal. One is the, as noted, as stated in the staff report, detail. The first is the detail on pedestrian connections throughout the site and to the riverway, and second, detail on the building massing, which is the applicant's architect provided. So hopefully it's available on to the public through Zoom, but a hard copy is being distributed to for your evaluation. Third, the potential increase in the amount of open space, which is provided the information provided in the staff report. Staff, the applicants increase the open space and rooftop patios from 186 square meter to 253 square meter. And lastly, the integration of affordable units into the proposal. So as stated in the letter submitted by the applicant is proposing to include 2 units with a studio in the existing building and 3 units in the new building in the phase 3. Over the rent for all the units will be capped in the amount of 987.50 rate for the next 10 years. That housing agreement will be registered on the title, and I do have to mention that the applicants mentioned at the last meeting the rent for the existing building is ranged somewhere between $895 and $925. $895 and $925. That was a pre-renovation the rate. So the entire building has been renovated recently. So the most updated rent for the existing building is currently set at $975 per month. So this is the number they were currently operating. So they did calculation based on the instruction city has provided. The information was provided was consistent with the recent rezoning application at 801 Ryan Road. So the applicants calculated based on that formula and then come up the proposal as written in the letter. So the applicants here, applicants and his architect, they in attendance in this meeting. So if there's any technical question, they're available to answer. So that concludes my presentation. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take.
Thanks very much, Mr. Seda. And I do see that we have a question or comment from Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I don't actually have any questions. As Council knows, when this application originally came forward, I felt that the applicants had been working with the city over a considerable period of time under the policy and practice that was in place, and that they had designed a positive and sensible housing project that would fit in with our goals of density and provide additional rental accommodation in the community. And it seems to me that they've taken steps to address some of the concerns that members of council had. And I think that it's important that we send signals to our development community that that when policy is in place, we follow that. We have in fact now changed the policy in relation to variances, but that has happened after the fact in relation to this application. So I think we should approve this project and see it go ahead. I think it will be a very useful development that will provide more residential accommodation in the center of the city. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. And Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Great, thank you, Mayor. In looking at this, I think this raises, in my mind, a challenge in terms of the affordable units, and I think it comes down to using the Hills formula as a way of calculating that. And the Hills formula considers both one bedrooms and studio apartments in the same category. And if we're using sort of looking at the 801 Ryan Road model, in that case, those were all one bedroom units with a planned market rent of $1,350. And so the Hills cap, the one that Mr. Seda was speaking of $987.50, would constitute a 27% reduction from market. And that's been in the range that council's been trying to see included in developments wherever possible. At 801 Ryan Road, it was 10% of units at 27% below the market rate for those units, and that would begin on day one when the units were occupied. And the challenge here is that the units that are offered are studios, and well, I appreciate the correction in the rent last time here. It was stated as $895 to $925 was the going rate. And I understand it's now at $970, and the website currently says $940. But if we take it at $975 as the current rate, then the current rate is below the cap. So the cap, at least at this point in time, wouldn't have an impact on the rent. It wouldn't provide an amenity at this point. It's, as rents do tend to go up, it's likely that at some point it would provide some sort of discount because the proponent has offered 10 years at this particular rate. But when that happens and how much that discount might be is speculative, and it's down the road. I think it would be more in line with what I think many members around the table were looking for, would be something which actually provided affordable housing when the building was opened and occupied, rather than something which would provide no discount for some time and then progressively small, then progressively slightly larger discounts over the years. as a consequence, I do have difficulty seeing this as an amenity, given that currently it does not provide any reduction in the anticipated rent for any of the units which are offered. I see that by following the same process as 801 Ryan, we've come up with vastly different results. Using the Hills figures that 801 Ryan produced 27% below market rate, which in my mind is definitely falls within the range of affordable housing. Whereas using this formula, initially the rent cap is above the actual rents. So I have in mind that I would like to see it possible if there's a way for the process to, in terms of the outcome, to resemble something more similar to what happened at Ryan Road, rather than the process resembling it. Because as I was saying, lumping 1-bedrooms and studio apartments into the same category as the Hills rate does, can produce distorted results. And in this case, as I said, one case it produces 27% below market, in the other case it produces a number that's above market. And I think, for most people in the community are looking to see more affordable housing provided. And I know that the proponent has supported us on affordable housing in the past, and that's greatly appreciated. And I'm wondering if it would be helpful perhaps to defer again to see if it's possible to provide, come to an agreement between staff and the proponent on something which would provide affordable housing and provide it in the near term rather than at some possible future point. And I think I'll just probably leave it there. Thank you.
And at this point, I should comment that the proponent is in attendance here today and is welcome to sit at the table as they did last time if they'd like to respond to any of the questions or if they have any input they'd like to provide. My apologies for not doing it at the beginning. I should have done that when we started, since I did see you walk in here, so my apologies. And just before we pass it on to the next councillor, just because some comments have been made, and I don't know that you knew you would have the opportunity to speak, but do you want to respond, or would you rather wait at this point?
I think we'll just wait until everybody's had a chance to speak.
Okay, thanks. All right, Councillor McCullough.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, picking up on some of the points that both Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor Hillian have made. I do have similar questions around the value of allocating 5 studio suites as suggested, and even going as far as to put a housing agreement in place. I don't see the value in terms even of our staff's time in designating an agreement that basically would set a cap on rent higher than what the market rate is. And I think what we are looking to see is something where the applicant is delivering a community benefit for the vast changes that are being requested through this variance. And to recap some of those from the previous meeting, we're looking at a reduction in parking of 40%, which is, in my mind, a pretty significant variance. And even with that 40%, it's not meeting what our normal standards are, that it's mostly small car parking spots, which is different and certainly not following the policy that we currently have in place. We're looking at side yard setbacks of almost 90% in several cases. We're doubling the height of the building, which is essentially doubling the allowable number of units. And also with the newest iteration of changes that were provided tonight, we're now seeing a 40% reduction in open usable space versus the 50 from the last meeting, which is great to see an expansion in the usable rooftop space. But again, it is different than what our policy is. And I think what was communicated from council at the previous meeting is that we would like to see the applicant provide some kind of community benefit that recognizes what these changes mean for this development, which is a significant increase in what is possible to take place on this lot in order for us to change what is laid out in our current policies. So I think despite the fact that this is not typically what the process is, this is also not a typical variance application. I haven't seen anything like it in the 3 years that I've sat here, and my experience is certainly more limited than some people around this table. But to me, this isn't a cookie cutter variance application where we're adjusting some variances because of a odd shaped lot. It's significantly different than what our policy lays out for this type of zoning. And I think seeing some community benefit received for these changes is not an unreasonable approach to take here. So I would definitely suggest that we defer this back to staff, just even to get a clarity as to what the value would be in creating a housing agreement that caps rent higher than the market rate is currently. I'm not sure if staff want to speak to whether I've misinterpreted that, but to me, that seems like what we would be achieving with the suggested housing agreement that's mentioned in the report.
All right, Mr. Seta, did you want to respond?
Thanks for acting CEO to Mayor Council. Yes, we're happy to start having a discussion with the applicant if required. But again, this is not a typical process we often takes without clear policy. So it's just a little bit difficult situation we have to deal with. But if applicants willing to have chat with us, we're happy to review the number again.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor McCollum?
I don't. Thanks.
And Councillor, Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I think because we've had this application come forward for the last council meeting or previous council meeting that was then referred back to staff, and then there was a subsequent motion passed by council for staff to begin negotiations around community amenities or amenity contributions coming out of development variance permit application processes. That the recommendation of staff today is that council consider the approval. Should council want staff to do further negotiation or continue negotiation with the applicants, that would be appropriate direction under option 2. So essentially the decision today is we approve the DVP as it's being requested and supported by staff, or refer it back to staff and provide additional direction around what your expectations are as far as that amenity level would be for further conversations with the applicant. Thank you.
And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So when we're done with receipt, I'm happy to move option 2 and defer consideration. So you let me know when that's appropriate. I don't have a ton of experience developing in the city of Courtenay, but I have sat on the other side of the table concerning development in the city. And my experience is that when you come to the city with a piece of land that is zoned for one use and you want to change it significantly, whether it's for setbacks or height, they generally aim to get you to a comprehensive development zone. That's a zoning that's specific to your site. For a couple of reasons. One, your zoning probably doesn't meet what you want to do with it. And 2, maybe we don't have a development, we don't have a zoning that fits your project already on the books. And so I would agree that, there are significant changes to the zoning, although they're coming through as variances. So I don't really take the argument that this has been going on and it's following policy, because it's really looking to change the use of that land. And though I think it's being changed in a good way, I also think you need to bring your A game for development and bring some amenities forward as well. So I think the simple solution here is really just to put this price cap on 1-bedroom units, and then you've got a great offer, really, and it would be really simple. But offering a higher level, a higher cost for a unit than you're currently charging it for doesn't strike me as an amenity either. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Councillor Frisch. And I think, you know, I'll maybe make a couple of comments as well. And I see that Rick's got his light on. Do you want to comment now? Okay. Yeah, I was just, you know, again, it is something that we're looking at. And actually, I think it was Councillor Frisch at the last meeting when I rewatched the video to try to really wrap my head around what we asked staff to do, because they, at the end of the day, have to operationalize the thoughts that we have pinging around in our brains. And then, you know, and we get to the HIL formula that basically says this is how you figure out what's affordable in your community, which was used on that Ryan Road development as well, and used as basically a precedent to talk about today. But getting back to what Councillor Frisch had mentioned last time, and I'm not sure if this is how it would apply with how Ryan Road was done, but you had commented you could just increase the rates of the other units to offset those units, so then you'd get that discount. So and again, I'm not sure how that makes sense if all the units already meet the HIL, if they do, because then that's one of the things I guess that I would have for the proponent is it almost, given the numbers, that there's more than just the 5 that are going to meet that that rate today, not just 10%, so to speak. So I think that's the clarification I'm trying to see is if right now we have this tool called HIL, but if that's not what council wants, then we have to be so articulate to our staff so that they can operationalize what's going on, like what we want. Because we've already referred it once, and if we refer it a second time, we just have to be so clear on exactly what the outcomes are. So but with that, maybe I'll let actually Councillor McCollum, I'll maybe let you jump in.
Yeah, to answer what you've asked for, I think Councillor Frisch also articulated it that if we're not receiving a community benefit that's below market, it's not really meeting the bar. So I feel like that could have been identified. Even looking at those tables, it doesn't set out a rate for studio. It says 1-bedroom. So as Councillor Frisch mentioned, we could pick it. You know, there's an opportunity to provide 1-bedrooms. That's really not my call to make, but in previous discussions, one instance we did use the HLS because it delivered close to 30% below market. In another instance, we were looking at 30% below market that weren't rentals. So to clarify, 30% below market, not cherry picking a number that works out that there's not a reduction to the market, or no difference between what's being offered and the market rate. So I think that's as clear as I could make my expectation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And that's, you know, I had this question mark next to market rate because we have multiple 1-bedrooms, 2-bedrooms, suites, etc., bachelor suites, and but they're not all the same rate. Like they all kind of fluctuate. So market rate, I guess. What's that? Yeah, but just that different developers or different landlords, they charge a different rate, even though they might all be 1-bedrooms, but one building might be one rate, another building might be another market rate. So it's just getting clarity around that as well. Councillor Cole Hamilton, I see you have another comment or question.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I was just, you were asking for our expectations, and I think we've had a few different discussions about contributions of affordable housing over the last many meetings, and I think the common theme throughout all of them has been a request for 10% of the units to be at approximately 30% below market. And I don't think that's changed. I think you can even look back at the previous meeting, and I'm fairly sure that I and a few other people may have mentioned that at that meeting, that was what we were hoping for when we look at provision of affordable housing as an amenity, when we're increasing the number of units that a developer is able to create, especially when it's a substantial an increase from 20 units to 50 units. So I think that clarity is there. And while the HLS process was used on 801 Ryan, it was used to arrive at almost exactly that, 27%, 10% of the units at 27% below market. And I think here we've copied the process, but we've come up with a completely different result. And I just think that bears looking at and rethinking, and seeing if we can produce through discussions something that resembles the ask that we've made quite clearly of other proponents coming to us when we've asked them for affordable housing. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cole-Hamlin, for getting that clarity. And again, I think it's just to be as articulate as we can. And would you like me to pass it over? Would you like to? All right.
Well, I think it's very hard to bring your A game to the table when in fact you go to staff and you say, what's the policy direction and what are you looking for us? And there was clarity. As a matter of fact, it was a chain of emails that we received from staff saying that this was what was going to be recommended by staff and the administration within the city. And so we reacted to that and provided that information at a timely basis. What we're hearing now is something that staff obviously wasn't aware of. I mean, it's very hard for us to know how to respond to a changing policy when in fact staff is not providing us with the benchmarks that you're really looking at. And for us, it's complicated because in other communities, we use that formula. Both in Whistler and Tofino, proposals that we've made for affordable housing have used, in fact, that particular table as the benchmark as to how we set the rents going forward for those buildings. And we have a unique situation here is that I guess if we were going to go back and think about the proposal and the ramifications of where those ultimate rents find themselves, in other words, at higher than what we are currently charging, then we would have said probably it would have made more sense to restrict or have the housing that is restricted within the new building, where in fact the rents obviously downstream are going to be much higher. So that wasn't something that we thought about. And so when you say that it's only for one bedrooms, if you look at the language in the table, it says one bedroom or less, and that's what we interpret. I mean, we and where did the information come from? The information came from your staff. So to say that we're not responding or are not understanding, I'm a bit lost there. I mean, if now you're saying something entirely different, but your staff didn't tell us that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've acknowledged at this table, and that's why we've asked, I've asked to get that clarity from council, and we haven't voted, there's not a motion on the table other than receipt. So this right now is just a discussion to say, where are we at? We, basically putting our cards on the table so that, again, if this is getting referred back to staff, that there is the utmost amount of clarity around what the expectations are. Because I think that's, obviously that's why we're where we are right now. It's because there were expectations and those expectations haven't been fully met, right? So if that makes sense, right? So.
Well, it makes sense.
Yeah.
What have we been doing for the last 4 weeks?
Councillor Helene?
You know, Mayor, the dilemma that we have right now just illustrates the point that I was trying to make earlier, that when we change the process and the practice at the 11th hour after a project has been in stream for quite some time, this sort of clarity appears to be difficult to determine. And I'm not sure how you resolve this. I would like to see this project go ahead. I don't think the rents are unreasonable. And I go back to the point I made before that even though it's a significant variance, it's a variance in line with what we want to see in terms of development in the core of the city center. And we had clear policy on rezoning that when there's a rezoning request, there's an amenity contribution that is significant. We didn't have that policy in relation to variance until the last council meeting. So I think that it would be preferable to resolve this issue by having this development proceed based on the staff recommendation and making it clear in the future that variance requests that provide a significant change in the status of a project are going to be viewed significantly or substantially as a rezoning. And that would also allow more time for council and staff to actually have some dialogue around what that actually means in terms of the discussion that goes on between staff and proponents, because I don't think it's an easy debate to have at the council table. People can toss out numbers and make suggestions, and these are really dialogues that I believe should go on between staff and the proponents. And I think council's job is to give clear direction to staff through policy, not through statements made at the council table, but through policy and resolution. And that's something that we didn't have until the 11th hour with this development. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Hillian. And immediately after that meeting I did talk to Councillor Coleman about that lack, and so we did try to deal with it as quickly as we can. But I do take your point. I did see some fingers going towards buttons, but no lights have gone on yet. However, we do have something on the table for receipt. I'd like to dispense with that so we can move forward if we're comfortable with that at this point. So all those in favor of receipt? That's unanimous. And if somebody would like to make a motion, or if you'd like to speak some more, Councillor first.
Thanks, Mayor. I think we're I hope that everyone's clear on the direction we're hoping to go. And so with that, I'll move option 2 and defer consideration of the development permit with variance number 2107 pending receipt of further information.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments based on the motion on the table? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes. All right. Next on the agenda, we have engineering services for air quality and wood smoke in the Comox Valley. And that I will pass it on to, and I didn't practice this before, but I believe it's Ms. Tazioli. Okay, all right, thanks. All right. Oh, we need to move and second it, I think, as well. Oh, we're back to my apologies.
It's your own bylaw.
Sorry. Yeah, 509. There we go. And hot drop. 12.1.1. Or not. Hang on. Okay, cool. 12.1.1. Councillor 12 point. We're good? Yep. Okay. Sorry, I was reading the the notes in here and got confused, which is not that difficult some nights. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So I'll move for third reading. I'll move that zoning amendment bylaw number 3021, 2021, which is for 2099 Hawk Drive, which is a bylaw to amend the zoning bylaw to rezone 2099 Hawk Drive from residential 1 to residential 1S to allow for a secondary suite. Pass third reading.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments regarding this bylaw? And I don't see any. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's unanimous. And next we have 12.2.2, the Dingwall 1544 Dingwall Road. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I'll move that zoning amendment bylaw number 3043, 2021 for 1544 Dingwall Road, which is to amend the zoning bylaw by adding, notwithstanding any provision of this bylaw, a secondary suite is permitted on that spot. Pass third reading.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. And Councillor Theos.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, a few years ago, we talked about having more of a blanket with secondary suites throughout the community as in terms of approval. Can I ask, where are we at with that potential discussion about, I mean, this is a number of these secondary suites are coming in front of us now, and where we're going to go in the future would depend on whether we look at these on a case-to-case basis or whether we do them more on a blanket basis. But I'm trying to recall, when are we going to have that back in front of us where we're going to have that discussion?
You must be a waiter. I just took a bite. My apologies, sir. But I believe that's going to be coming back through the OCP process in the new year. So it's going to go out for referrals and be discussed, and then it'll come back. And we were given that timeline, but I don't have it in front of me. But when we went over the OCP, I don't know, staff, Mr. Seta, do you know when we'd be seeing that type of information coming back in terms of secondary suites?
Yes. Thank you to acting CEO to Mayor and Council. So we were currently working on the drafting and finishing up the draft of OCP for public review in the new year. So that will be draft will be shared with the senior government agency, department agency, as well as the public. And the general direction is to increase in density, to support increasing density within established neighborhood. So it's part of it. Increasing density is part of it, but the Council Hills mentioned the blanket allowing secondary suites in all area. It's another process. It has to be regulated through zoning bylaw. So zoning bylaw amendment will come almost concurrent or immediately after the OCP adopted. So it will be expected sometimes next year, around summertime.
I'll turn my mic off as well. Thanks, Councillor Theos, for the question. So yeah, so next summer that'll be coming back. All right, and I don't see any further questions or comments. So all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is unanimous. And then we are on to 2099 Hawk Drive for final adoption. And Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that zoning amendment bylaw number 3021, 2021 for 2099 Hawk Drive be finally adopted.
Excellent. It's been moved and seconded. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that's unanimous. And next we have 12.3.2, 1544 Dingwall Road for final adoption. And we have Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that zoning amendment bylaw number 3043, 2021, 1544 Dingwall Road be finally adopted.
Excellent. It's been moved and seconded. And are there any further questions or comments regarding this? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And now we move back to 4.1, which is Recreation, Culture and Services for the Earl Naswell Community Christmas Dinner. And I'm going to be passing, do we need to move and second this though, I believe? Sure, Councilor Frisch.
I'll move that based on the December 6, 21 staff report, Earl Naswell Community Christmas Dinner request to use Florence Philberg Center, council approve option 1 and direct staff to not enforce the rental fee rate as outlined in the recreation facility rental and user fee bylaw for the 2021 Earl Naswell Community Christmas Dinner, and that staff advise the organizers of the Earl Naswell Community Christmas Dinner to apply for a grant in aid for future years events instead of requesting a waiving of the facility rental fee.
All right, that's been moved and seconded. And I'll pass it over to our acting CAO, Ms. O'Connor.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have the Director of Recreation, Culture and Community Services available to answer any questions should you have some, but the report in this case is quite straightforward with a request to waive the fees.
Thank you very much. And Councilor Moore.
Yeah, I understand the rationale for, well, the recommendation to approve this, but also that we don't like to do things this way generally. I know this has come up before where things happen kind of piecemeal, or, you know, we get these requests, these one-off requests. And so the suggestion is made in the report to do the application for grant and aid, but I guess I'm curious because we have kind of a halt on the grants and aid, how that sort of is congruent with that policy, because there may be other groups that come forward for this type of request, and we'll see that we've recommended that. So I'm just wondering how that all kind of connects. Thanks.
All right, Ms. Saunders.
Thank you. Through the acting CAO to Mayor and Council, thank you for the question. In discussion with finance staff, they are reviewing the gaming revenues and will be bringing forward a report in the new year regarding the grant and aid program. So there will be further information for Council to consider around the grant and aid program in the new year. Part of the reason for the recommendation is, as you articulated, is that we do receive these requests on an ad hoc basis, and staff are recommending a process that would enable more transparency and consistent criteria for applying a waiving of fees. So that's our recommended approach at this time. If Council has other direction, staff are open, of course, to hearing that or taking that direction.
Yep, no, you can have a follow-up, absolutely.
I'm just wondering if there may be something within the grant and aid process for these types of requests, because they are a little bit different than, you know, the waiving of the fees. If maybe we need something that's separate and distinct around this. I mean, we're just talking about having clear policy. So, because I don't see that it really fits perfectly in the grants and aids per se. Because it's space usage that can come up sometimes quite suddenly as well. I mean, this is something that happens every year, but we've had requests that somebody's needed space and don't have the funds, et cetera, on, you know, more of a spontaneous almost. Anyway, I'm just wondering if we need to look at that in the future. That's just my comment. Thanks.
All right, thanks for that. And we have Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I think Councillor Morin makes a good point, particularly given that organizations like this muster all their resources for this particular event at this time of year, and don't necessarily have a bureaucracy that gets organized to present or press for grant and aid several months in advance. But nonetheless, I think we want to see this event go ahead. It's an amazing demonstration of love and charity for the unfortunate in our community to provide them with a Christmas dinner. It's done with a very good spirit, and it's been adapted for COVID times. I think our best bet is to pass the resolution as recommended and look to staff for further recommendations on procedure through re-examination of our grants policy and any other recommendations they may come up with as we deal with this moving forward.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. And I'm involved in a bunch of events that are annual, and potentially what can happen is when the event is happening, at that time they apply for the next year, and that application will sit in abeyance until the grant and aid process starts. And in that way, their minds are on it. They've picked the day for the following year. They've reserved that date. And so potentially that's a way to make sure while they've got the attention of folks who again are all volunteering their time, that they can make sure that the ducks, so to speak, are as much in a row as possible for the following year. So a possibility, but with that, Councillor, right.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to say that if we are taking a look at our grant and aid policy and with the resumption of gaming revenues, it would probably be easy enough for us to approach this organization and see if they plan on holding this event annually and therefore include them in our grant and aid policy conditional on the event going ahead. Which I think is a little easier to do. We're giving them a grant that's specifically tied to what it costs us or the revenue that we would get if we rented that facility, which we're not actually losing anyway, since nobody's likely to rent it on that particular date. So that would be another way of us addressing it. And I think if we let our financial people work up what's happening with gaming revenues, we will probably have an opportunity through our finance committee or through it being brought to council to consider how to manage this going forward.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Councillor Hillian. And we've given lots of suggestions for staff, and obviously it's an extremely worthwhile event that's been going on for quite some time. So with that, I believe we've got the motion on the floor, and so would like to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's unanimous. Excellent. And next we have our council meeting agenda and Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that council approve option 1 and set the 2022 council meeting calendar as outlined in Appendix A of the report, and that the meetings identified in the 22 council meeting calendar be held at 4 p.m. in the Civic Room at the Comox Valley Regional District Administrative Building, located at 770 Harmston Avenue, unless otherwise posted.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Oh, sorry. That got seconded. Sorry. I know I jumped in there a little bit quick, and I'll pass it over to our acting CEO, Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you very much. So to preempt Councillor Hillian, for the benefit of the public, I'll do a brief overview of the recommendations outlined in the report. So essentially, this report, as you can tell, or as you can see, is recommending quite a significant change to the council meeting calendar, and outlines various rationale as to why staff believe that a change in the calendar will actually result in quite a beneficial outcome when it comes to efficiency and effectiveness of workflow management, as well as decreasing marginally the amount of scheduled time that members of council are beholden to going into the 2022 election. We did a comprehensive analysis of other local governments to see what their schedules were like. In addition to the schedule reviews and the table you see in the report, I also did reach out to some of them who were a bit more anomalous to find out what their personal experience had been with that calendar schedule, to get some feedback as well, because there's the agendas or the calendars don't necessarily reflect everything that a council or the city is undertaking. So as you can see from the table, I broke them down by population. I included some municipalities that I'm familiar with coming from the city of Burnaby. That was one that was easy for me to include. But kind of showing you the number of annual meetings that were scheduled, the number of committee of the wholes, the gap over the winter break, as well as any scheduled gaps in the summer months. And in going through this, You can see that the numbers for the most part are quite consistent with a few anomalies. What isn't captured in here are special council meetings for things like budget processes, public hearings, special meetings that arise out of an emergency situation, and or closed meetings. So there will be some discrepancies just in what's publicly posted and available for the comparison. Essentially, in addition to the amount of scheduled time council is committing as politicians and in service to their community, staff with experiencing within a 5-week time frame 3 back-to-back meetings, we're having a challenge managing the workflow with the labor force that we have. So many of the folks that you see coming here and presenting on council reports are the same ones that are then communicating the actions, that are implementing and overseeing those actions, as well as gathering a lot of the feedback and providing the direction. So by providing us with that reprieve from meeting to meeting will better allow us to engage the public, engage each other, and communicate the actions of council in a more meaningful way. To mitigate any potential impacts or negative impacts on this, one of the pieces or recommendations is to eliminate the committee of the whole, which the way we've been running the COWs is essentially similar to a regular council meeting, albeit with the restriction of not being able to consider bylaws, which disproportionately hits the finance department as well as development services when it comes to rezoning. So by eliminating that, we're not reducing the number of meetings that council can consider those rezoning applications or those financial bylaws. As this would be the first year that we're trying out the new schedule, as always, council does retain the ability to call a special meeting as it sees fit, either to deal with a specific item or if the load just gets a little too heavy and we need to lighten it a bit. So with that, I'll answer any questions that council may have.
Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this makes good sense. I just wanted to provide a brief historical perspective. I believe it was in the 2011 term, when terms were still 3 years, that council meetings were in fact reduced from every week to twice a month, plus a committee of the whole. So, going back 7 or 8 years, it was not uncommon for there to be 4 or 5 meetings a month. And I think that what we've seen is a significantly onerous increase in work for staff that is involved in putting that type of frequency of meeting together. There was concern expressed by some council members at the time when that reduction took place about less transparency, less access for the public. But I think living in the social media and Zoom age as we are, we actually have more opportunity for the public to see what's going on than has ever been the case before. And as a result, we actually have more demands on staff and council because of that. So whatever we can do to lessen the load on staff and still do the business of the city in an efficient manner, I'm certainly in favor of. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree that this makes good sense to change this. My concern is always around the public perception of reducing meetings, and I know that Ms. McDonald mentioned that there are many other meetings, and I just want to reiterate that there are numerous other meetings in addition to the council meetings that we all attend, and I know most of us put those in our reports that people can see. That it is made public, but I just want folks to know that when we're collecting our paycheck, that we're not just getting paid for those council meetings, that we are putting in a lot of other time on committees and budget meetings and lunch and learns and all kinds of other things. So I think that's important to note. I see in the calendar that there is a September-October period where there's 3 meetings, 3 weeks in a row. And I just wondered if that's necessary or if it's possible to take one of those meetings out to be aligned with the rationale with the rest of the calendar. There's the 19th, 26th of September, and then the 3rd of October.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yes, that was to do with an accommodation around this year's UBCM conference. So typically UBCM is earlier in the month. So you have a week before you have that Labor Day stat holiday, and then you have the UBCM. So in keeping with that every alternating week, we would have only had the one meeting. And part of the challenge is this is coming off of what is proposed to be the August break. There could be quite an accumulation of documentation and reports for consideration by council over that time that may result in a disproportionately large meeting on the 19th. So really it was put in there to make sure that, because one of the goals of the new schedule is to equalize those meetings and the size of those meetings. So that was the intent. However, by the time September rolls around, we would have been well into this schedule. And if it's no longer necessary, it's something we can bring to council's attention, and you're welcome to council it at that point or move forward should the volume of work warrant it.
Right, great, thank you.
Excellent, thanks for the question. And I don't see any further questions at this point. And I just really want to thank staff for making this happen. I know my first year on council, trying to figure out what was happening and planning my life around it, and then having meetings canceled and things like our conferences, which are baked in years in advance, those dates we know, and then having to cancel meetings throughout the year and stuff, it was always a bit of a challenge. And I do appreciate the fact that if we do need to, we can always call special meetings as needed. And really, I think it really helps people prepare for the next year. And the only two comments that I have, and they're not good or bad comments, I don't think, but just sort of general comments. One is that we do have an election coming up next year. So if this calendar is ready prior to the election, so when people are going through the nomination process in September-ish or so, if we know the dates for the following year, so people could know what the actual impact to their life might be. That might be too early, I don't know, but I thought I'd throw that out there. And of course, there is that one council meeting after the election, which can sometimes be a bit awkward. So, but other than that, I think it is an unbelievable leap forward. And I just, again, can't thank staff enough for making sure that we're working as efficiently and effectively as possible. So with that, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And next we are into wood smoke, I believe, 4.4.1. Excellent. That's been moved and seconded, and I will again pass it over to Ms. Tazioli.
Thank you, Mayor. I am Janine Tazioli, environmental engineer from Engineering Services. I just want to confirm, can everybody see my screen and the presentation? All right, awesome. So as you're aware, air quality and wood smoke is a complex issue here in the community. I've been working through this complexity as a member of the Regional Airshed Committee led by the CVRD. So the objective of today's presentation is to provide a background on the technical aspects of the issue and discuss next steps to address air quality concerns. So the BC Ministry of Environment maintains a network of air monitoring stations across the province. The Comox Valley has one provincial air monitoring station located at the Courtney Elementary School. So this air monitoring station continuously records concentrations of fine particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, and ozone, which are compared against the BC air quality objectives presented in this table. The BC air quality objectives define the acceptable concentration limit for each of these pollutants. So you'll notice that each air quality objective is based on an averaging period. Since air monitoring occurs continuously, the average concentration over a certain period of time is calculated and compared to the air quality objectives. So for example, you can see in the table here that the average concentration of particulate matter measured over a 24-hour period should not exceed 25 micrograms per cubic meter, and the average measured over the entire year should not exceed 8 micrograms per cubic meter. From the table, we can also see that concentrations of nitrogen dioxide are far below the air quality objectives for both the hourly and the annual averaging period. And concentrations of ozone are far below the air quality objectives for the 8-hour averaging period. Looking over to fine particulate matter, you'll notice that the annual concentration met the air quality objectives, but it was quite close at 7.2 with a limit of 8. And then for the 24-hour averaging period, we met the objective at 23.2 micrograms. It is important to note that the 24-hour averaging periods are evaluated based on that 98th percentile, which represents the maximum concentration for 98% of 24-hour periods within the year. So the maximum, however, is the absolute maximum that was observed throughout the entire year. And so you'll notice that the maximum is higher than the guideline. However, because compliance is based on the 98th percentile, we did achieve that air quality objective. So this data indicates that air quality related to fine particulate matter is the greatest concern and not nitrogen dioxide or ozone. And these averages are a good way to analyze the situation overall, but it is important to know that the air quality experienced at any given moment could be quite different than the average. And these graphs provide more context to that. So the graph on the left illustrates the average daily concentration of fine particulate matter graphed since 2012. So the red line represents the BC air quality objective for that 24-hour period, which is that 25 micrograms per cubic meter. The blue bars represent the 98th percentile concentrations of fine particulate matter measured for each year. The yellow bars on top represent the wildfire influence for each of those years. And then that brown line you see is the maximum recorded in that particular year. So a couple of key things taking from that graph is that 2019 and 2020 were the first years that our 98th percentile concentration was below the air quality objectives. And you'll also notice that since 2017, we have been on a downward trend, which is positive news, although we can't comment on what may be causing that. The graph on the right illustrates the number of days where we exceeded that air quality objective. So looking at 2020, we had a total of 9 days that we were exceeding that air quality concentration. 2 of those days were related to concentrations within the community, and 7 of those days were a wildfire influence. So that distinction is made for each of those years. We can see the number of days where we've exceeded that concentration decreasing again since 2017. So the average concentration of fine particulate matter only tells part of the story. After all, the concentrations may vary significantly throughout the day or throughout the year. So on the left, it plots the hourly average concentration of PM2.5 throughout a typical day. So we can see that concentrations begin rising around 6 p.m. They peak around 11 p.m. They fall overnight. And then around 6 in the morning, there's a little bit of a rise again before they fall throughout the afternoon. So this average daily variation in PM2.5 concentrations corresponds with residential wood stove use. Looking at the monthly averages, again, note that the annual average concentration for the air quality objective is 8 micrograms per cubic meter. For half the year, we are far below that when we look at the summer months from April to October. However, from October to March, we are above that, almost on average. So this illustrates that Courtenay experiences good air quality during the summer months, and in the winter, air quality is poor in the evenings and overnight. The monthly distribution also corresponds with wood burning appliances used in the winter. So to understand the sources of PM2.5, the BC Ministry of Environment compiled a particulate matter emissions inventory for the Comox Valley using emission data from 2015. The pie chart in the middle summarizes their findings. So you can see that 36% of the total PM 2.5 is attributed to space heating, 45% could be attributed to open burning, and the remaining 20% is a combination of transportation, fugitive dust, agricultural, and industrial sources. So focusing on that space heating and that open burning, which represent the greatest components, we have some smaller pie charts. So the chart for open burning illustrates that 93% of open burning emissions are from provincially regulated pile burns, with remaining 6% are regional or municipal burns, and 1% is related to wildfires. Looking over at space heating, we can see that 99% of space heating emissions are attributed to residential wood heating, whereas the other heating methods only contribute 1% of particulate matter emissions. So what happens to particulate matter after it's emitted really depends on the atmospheric condition. So in a normal atmospheric condition, the air near the ground is warmer than the cool air above it. You may recall that hot air rises because it's less dense than cold air. In this condition, the warm air rises and cools as it reaches greater altitudes in the atmosphere. After it cools, it falls back to the ground. This movement creates vertical mixing that carries pollutants away from the surface and disperses them in the upper atmosphere. In an inverted atmospheric condition, the air near the ground is cooler than the warm air above it. In this condition, there's almost no mixing because the cold air is more dense than the warm air, so it stays close to the ground and doesn't rise. As a result, temperature inversions restrict the upward movement of air, causing pollutants to become trapped and accumulate under that inversion layer. Inversions can form near the ground level or thousands of meters in the atmosphere. A temperature inversion occurs wherever the air at the surface is colder than the air above it. So this happens in a number of ways. It may happen in the evening on clear nights when the ground rapidly loses heat and the surrounding air retains it. It may happen in valleys where cold air from the top of the mountain peaks flows down the mountain and fills a valley, or in coastal areas where the upwelling of cold water decreases that surface air temperature. So the geographic position of the city of Courtenay within a valley and along a coast makes the region especially susceptible to temperature inversions. Here, inversions occur frequently, forming almost daily or multiple times a week. Inversions often form at dusk and break the following day when the sun warms the surface of the valley. It's also important to note that inversions may last multiple days if the weather remains cloudy and the winds are calm. Inversions that last multiple days may trigger a provincial air quality advisory because all the particulate matter emitted for the duration of the inversion accumulates and causes hazardous conditions. So the variation of particulate matter across the Comox Valley can be seen in each of these graphics. These graphics were prepared as part of a mobile monitoring study conducted in 2017 by Matthew Wagstaff, a master's student from the University of British Columbia. As part of this study, researchers drove the same route through the Comox Valley for 7 consecutive nights. They measured the concentrations of PM 2.5 along the route and mapped the average concentration along each of those routes. Maps generated from this monitoring study can be seen on the slide. And so you can really see how much variation exists across the valley in the same time period. So on one side, we have West Courtenay and Comox, and then the other side, we have a greater focus on West Courtenay and Cumberland. It is important to note that there are 2 different scales of particulate matter. So on the left, the scale maxes out at 24 parts per million. And on the right, the scale maxes out at 66 parts per million. So that just shows the degree of variation that we're seeing from street to street and between neighborhoods. This means that those who live closest to wood stoves are most impacted. So there are two provincial regulations that have a role in managing particulate matter. The first is the open burning smoke control regulation, and the second being the solid fuel burning appliance regulation. So the open burning smoke control regulation came into effect in 2019. It was amended in 2021, and it regulates the open fire combustion of vegetative debris, including land clearing, forestry operations, agriculture, community wildfire risk, wildlife habitat enhancement, and utility right-of-ways. So the Ministry of Environment outlined a process to comply with the new open burning smoke control regulations. And this process is seen here. So first step, explore every reasonable alternative to burning. Next, identify the smoke sensitivity zone. There's high, medium, and low zones defined. The Comox Valley and all of Eastern Vancouver Island is a high sensitivity zone. And so within that, there are zone restrictions that include burn times, setbacks, and ventilation index requirements. And then the person burning also needs to keep records of the burn. The solid fuel burning appliance regulations were first introduced in 2014 and amended in 2016. The first version specified that wood stoves and pellet stoves sold in BC must meet the US Environmental Protection Agency emission standard. In 2016, this was amended and made more restrictive. So the scope of regulation was expanded to include a wider range of appliances, and it also specified the type of fuel that can be burned within these stoves. So the regulation specifies that only untreated seasoned wood, which is defined to have a moisture content of less than 20%, is permitted to be burned. Other items that may be burned include wood pellets, manufactured fire logs, corn kernels, and seed hulls. It specifies that prohibited items are garbage, plastics, treated or painted wood, demolition debris, rubber, and unseasoned wood. So that would be wood that has a moisture content of more than 20%. The latest version of this regulation also specifies that a vendor may only sell appliances certified to meet emission standards set by the Canadian Standards Association or the US Environmental Protection Agency. This applies to wood burning boilers, furnaces, and outdoor boilers that were previously exempt in the earlier regulation. So within the Comox Valley, there's numerous ongoing actions to reduce wood smoke. Includes the Wood Smoke Reduction Program, local bylaws, rebates, and the Regional Airshed Committee. So the Wood Smoke Reduction Program has been operated since 2008 with support from the province. This program offers education about smart burning practices and offers rebates to residents who replace a wood burning appliance with a gas stove, pellet stove, propane stove, or an electric heat pump. As part of this program, additional rebates are also offered to residents located in wood smoke hotspot areas, such as Cumberland and West Courtney. On the bylaws side, local bylaws regulating the emission of smoke in the valley are summarized and really can be broken down into three categories. So there's the building bylaws, fire protection service regulation bylaws, and nuisance bylaws. So building bylaws are in place in the city of Courtney, town of Comox, and the village of Cumberland. And these bylaws prohibit the installation of wood burning appliances in new residential construction. In the CVRD, a building permit is required to install wood burning appliance. All regions also have fire protection service bylaws. However, their content varies, and some areas require an open burning permit, and some areas prohibit beach fires and campfires. Nuisance bylaws are in place within the regional district, as well as Courtney, Comox, and Cumberland. However, only the city of Courtney and the town of Comox identify smoke as a nuisance. The city of Courtney and the CVRD identify smoke as a nuisance. Comox identifies odor and dust as a nuisance, which could be interpreted to include smoke, and Cumberland did not specifically list smoke, dust, or odors. As far as rebates go, There are 3 organizations that offer rebates, which includes the Regional District Wood Smoke Reduction Program, BC Hydro, and Clean BC. So Wood Smoke Reduction Program offers a $1,000 rebate to residents who replace the wood stoves older than 2016. They are also eligible for Clean BC rebates, which are up to $3,000 to install a heat pump, or BC Hydro, which is up to $2,000. And each of these can be combined to maximize savings. And then the Regional Airshed Committee was initiated in 2020 by the Regional District with the objective to create a regional airshed protection strategy. So the vision of the Airshed Committee is that the Comox Valley has clean air that supports the health of all residents. This initiative is led by the Regional District, who coordinates a steering committee composed of members from the City of Courtenay, Town of Comox, Village of Cumberland, the Regional District, as well as the Ministry of Environment, Vancouver Island Health, Vancouver Island University, and the Comox First Nation. So during the development of the strategy, the steering committee has sought input from the roundtable, which is composed of community groups, industry representatives, fire departments, and members of the public. So the goal of this airshed protection strategy are listed on the slide. So you'll notice that there's 3 key goals to achieve measurable reductions in fine particulate matters, an effective coordination of efforts, and to educate and involve the community in understanding and reducing the impacts of air pollution. Within that first goal, it's quite large, so it's been broken up into 4 separate components, which is reducing emissions from existing residential wood burning appliances, transitioning away from biomass heating, eliminating the burning of yard waste in residential neighborhoods, and promoting and advocating for alternatives to open burning outside residential neighborhoods. So members of the steering committee and the roundtable, they formed working groups and they've been identifying actions to achieve each of these goals. And these actions will form the basis for the airshed protection strategy. So the next steps for the airshed committee are summarized in this graphic. So December 2021, the steering committee will review the airshed protection strategy. Going into January to March, it will be available for public review. The regional strategy will be finalized in April of 2022, and then we'll move to implementation after that. So that will expect it to be from May 2022 to 2023. You can see the staff efforts highlighted in each of the yellow bubbles. So currently we're seeking a council resolution for us to continue participating in the development of the airshed protection strategy. And then once April arrives and we have that finalized strategy, we will seek council support to implement the airshed protection strategy. So that's all for my presentation. I welcome any questions you may have.
Thanks very much for that. Really appreciate that presentation. And I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks very much, Janine, for a very thorough and informative presentation. Of course, the rub is that I think most of us have known this for several years, and we're still on the horns of the dilemma of how to resolve it. But I did have a couple of specific questions. The first was, you indicated that there's actually a downward trend in the particulate matter counts. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor Hillian.
Yeah, but I thought that I read in the airshed, the regional district's airshed report that was at one of the attachments, that there had been no appreciable improvement in the air quality over the years, despite education and other factors. Is that an inconsistency, or are we looking at different data, or what?
I would comment that it depends on what we define to be statistically significant. And right now we are seeing a positive downward trend, although we're not sure if it's sustainable or if it's a result of our efforts within the community. We hope so. And of course, because the airshed concerns are so variable across the valley, an improvement in one area doesn't necessarily mean an improvement in all areas. And we are limited by our measurements just from the one provincial air monitoring station. So although there is a downward trend from that particular monitoring station, it's not clear if that represents the entire region.
Okay, thanks. That leads to my second question, and I have three. And that's in relation to air monitoring stations. We have the one. Do you know how expensive it is to operate that, and what the possibilities are of getting more monitoring stations in the city?
Unfortunately, I don't have the data around the cost to run that current station. It is run provincially by the Ministry of Environment. So that's something that happens outside of the City of Courtenay staff and budget. However, there are considerations about installing new means of measuring particulate matter. It doesn't have to mean a new provincial air monitoring station. There are some technical advances in some smaller monitoring devices that may be more affordable, but it's something staff could look at in the future in combination with the regional district.
Yeah, so it strikes me it would be helpful to at least find out if we have that option, because of course we've got several hotspots, as we know, the Pelage Park area, and we actually have people in East Courtenay who've said that you know, they think they have a serious challenge up there. I do know people who've moved from one part of the city to another because of wood smoke concerns. I also would just relate that my son lives in Shanghai, which is a city of 27 million people and a large financial and industrial center, and with notoriously poor air quality. But he relates to me sometimes that the air quality in the Comox Valley, from the measurements that he can see from that station, is actually worse than over there. So no doubt we have an issue. And that relates to my third question. What do we hear from the health ministry about when there actually is an air quality advisory and how that is communicated? I mean, I'm always struck by the number of places around the community that I see the signs about, you know, we're at stage 3 water restrictions or whatever. But I confess I've never heard a warning that it's a bad air quality day and we should take measures accordingly, other than when we've had the wildfire situations.
Yeah, yes, that's correct. In wildfire situations, the province does issue an air quality advisory. There's also the Air Quality Health Index that's updated every hour with the latest information that reports on the air quality in the Comox Valley as well as other places. It is a provincial program. So we have a couple of those tools to measure, but they're not localized, where, you know, it's kind of based on an average. And so that's the challenge, is getting that localized information when we just have that one source of data.
Could you explain a little bit more about that? Because what I'm really interested in is how that gets communicated to the public, that there is in fact an air quality advisory and that the air in the Comox Valley is not fit to breathe for people who, you know, have asthma or you know, small children or seniors who might have a heart attack issue.
Currently, we rely on the province to communicate that message through their website. So
okay.
we don't have a local means of doing that.
So it doesn't necessarily go out to the radio stations that people listen to or hit the city's website. So that might be something we could work on. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Hillen. And maybe just to tack onto that just a little bit, one of the things that we implemented years ago at the regional district was for boil water emergencies, that we people could sign up for text or phone notifications, email, etc. So this might be, and when that was set up, the idea was it could be used for multiple functions. So that might be a possibility. So that'd be my one thing, reaching back from years and years ago. So next we have, sorry, I've lost my my list here. Councillor McCollum, my apologies.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks so much for the presentation. It's great to see that there is some measurements of improvement on this file. However, I think anyone that is living in these areas that are more heavily impacted or have been following the health guidance on what's being said by public health authorities when it comes to PM 2.5 is our current situation is a far cry from what we would like to see in terms of community health when it comes to our winter air quality. And so I guess my first general comment is just that I think that we need to do a lot more than what we've been doing so far, I suppose. I think my first question is actually just around some of the metrics that we're using in terms of defining what's acceptable in terms of our winter air quality. I did go on to the WHO website just to look at what some of the information is around PM 2.5, and they're using a significantly higher standard for what's considered safe air. On their 24-hour average, they're using 15, I believe, micrograms per meter. Actually, they're using 5 micrograms per meter for a 24-hour average, and they're recommending that it shouldn't exceed 15 more than 3 to 4 days per year. And we're doing that many times a month. And I'm curious to know if there is any communication as to whether or not the province is planning on matching their guidance with WHO, and also whether the Airshed advisory is simply looking to the province's standard, or if we're wanting to meet the standard that's set out by the World Health Organization.
Great question, Councillor McCollum. The Airshed, from what I've heard, the province is not reviewing those air quality standards. Those are air quality standards that not only apply in our community, but apply across the province. With that in mind, they are not an end goal. It doesn't mean that once we achieve them, our work is done. Our work continues, and with something like particulate matter, the lower the better. And there is a difference between what our planning guideline is and what the provincial guideline is, and what will offer the greatest health protection. And so lower concentrations offer the greatest health protection. And as a community, we can strive to a higher standard, although I don't hear anything about the province revising their current regulations.
Thanks for that clarification. The other comment I wanted to make on that is just parsing off the wildfire data. We've certainly seen a trend that we don't expect to change in the coming years, that we're increasingly impacted by wildfire smoke. And I think that really underscores the need to do better when it comes to our winter air quality, because these contaminants in the air, they build in, their impacts build depending on how much exposure we have over the year. And obviously, there's not a lot that we can do as a municipality in terms of limiting our wildfire pollutants, but we do have tools available to us to at least deal with the winter impacts, so that the overall toxins in the air will have a lesser impact on our population's health. The other question I wanted to ask was just about the reference to our nuisance bylaw. We passed a motion about August 2020 seeking a report from staff to consider options around bylaws and what we could do for improving basically responsible burning. I won't read the motion. The being able to address it through an existing nuisance bylaw, as referenced in the report, is the first I've seen of it. And I did go and look at our nuisance bylaw, and I couldn't really find any clear language that references wood smoke. So if you could just clarify what the options are with that.
To clarify, the nuisance bylaw is not designed specifically to address wood smoke. It is designed to address numerous nuisances within the community. So it would really be up to our bylaw group to interpret it or to see if wood smoke could be interpreted to be included as part of that bylaw. It's not something that has been done to date, but it's part of the regulatory framework that currently exists.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum and Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Recently, I took part in the Lung Foundation presentation on air quality, and we've heard many of these stats before around the health issues, but I thought it was important just to highlight some of them for folks out there who are using wood stoves to really hit home around the health impacts to their neighbors. And of course, there's a real spectrum of how people are using wood heating. Some are very responsible using dry wood, et cetera, but of course we know that many aren't. So there's a 19% increased risk of heart attack with these higher levels, 15% increase in babies born at low birth weight, 15% increase in COPD hospitalization, 32% increase in ear infections, and 16 to 22% increase in flu rate. And then when you add COVID, there wasn't specific information about that, but I would speculate that would be in there as well. And we get a lot of feedback, obviously, about how behaviors in the public are affecting people's health and well-being. We get complaints about people not feeling safe on a walk, or behaviors that are disturbing the peace of people. Out in Comox, not to resurrect something from the dead, but we've had odor issues that have impacted people's quality of life, and those are all serious things. This particular issue actually significantly affects people's physical health, including low birth weight of babies. So to me, this is a really significant health issue that I think we need to really take a look at how we're going to respond in a way that is not shaming, but that really hits the point home that the way wood is being burned here in stoves is really creating some huge health impacts for people. One of the things in one of the surveys that was provided, I believe it was from Vancouver, were the reasons that people burn wood. And of course, economic reasons are one, and we definitely want to look at equity issues in terms of the rebates and things like that, because it is expensive to change your heat source if you're low income. But 44% of people said they like the smell or beauty of a fire. And I do as well. And I think, going out to the beach occasionally or sitting around a campfire, we can all appreciate that. And it's beautiful to be around a fire. I love fires as well. But in terms of if that's your main reason and you're impacting the health of people around you, I think we really need to take a look at that as a community. So I'm hoping that the motion that Councillor McCollum refers to, perhaps it can't be a nuisance bylaw per se, but I think we need to ramp up the public awareness of this issue and have the education during those peak times, have people go out and visit people at 6 o'clock or whatever, and have a conversation with people. Because, this was a huge issue during the last election. Pretty much every person we talked to on the doorstep brought up this issue in particular areas of town. So I would like to see something come out of this that really has some weight and some teeth, because when we're looking at these health impacts, this is not insignificant at all. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moran. And next we have Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I've appreciated all the comments around the table, and I think just now Councillor Moran made a particularly clear and compelling case about the health impacts of wood smoke in our community. And you know, like so, Janine, may I say first of all, thank you for the report. It was comprehensive and lengthy. It was including attachments. It was several hundred pages. I appreciate that, and I appreciate hearing about the downward trend that we're seeing. Although, as you said, it may not be statistically significant at this point. It's encouraging to see things moving in that direction. Although, as a resident of the Puntledge Park neighborhood, I can tell you that there are some days that I can taste the wood smoke. And I've recently, since becoming a dog owner, find that when my dog comes in from the yard, she smells of smoke, and like she can smell her as she moves around the house because it's so thick and so prominent. And clearly, these all point to the need to take greater steps. And there are some useful steps described here. We've got rebates on heat pumps and on cleaner burning gas and pellet stoves. And I'm also looking forward to seeing the upcoming regional Airshed report. That I think it may be possible for us as a city to do something ourselves. And to that end, Councillor McCollum and I have been working together on 2 additional resolutions, which we'll be tabling at the next meeting. And the first one is to address measurably excessive wood smoke emissions. It's quite similar to the program that's currently in place successfully in Saanich. And measurement would occur in a non-intrusive fashion and would start with with a conversation and educational material about best practices for wood burning and wood storage, and progressing only to fines only if excessive emission continues to occur. I'm sure that we all want to be respectful of the health of our neighbors, so hopefully there will be no need for fines, and we can rely primarily upon education, but we do need to identify the particular locations where greater action is taken, and the Saanich program has shown itself to be able to do that by identifying excessive wood smoke. The second resolution echoes something that Councillor Hillian was referencing about communicating the air quality conditions that are around us. And this draft resolution that Councillor McCollum and I have been working on references would see the city issue and actively communicate voluntary no burning alerts based on the BC's published air quality health index forecasts, which, as you noted, are updated hourly. And again, I believe that members of the community want to do their part to contribute to improved air quality, and this would allow them to make more informed choices about when and when not to burn. So sort of stay tuned, and at the next meeting, we'll have sort of finalized versions of the resolutions to present to council. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Councillor Cole-Hamilton, for that. And we have Councillor McCollum.
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on some of those comments that Councillor Cole-Hamilton has eloquently provided, and to follow up on what Councillor Moran been saying, like in the previous election, this was one of the most discussed topics outside of affordable housing, and addressing it and seeking measurable improvements in air quality is something that this council has discussed repeatedly and prioritized. It's in our strategic priorities to advocate, collaborate, and act to reduce air quality contaminants. And I think we've certainly advocated and collaborated when it comes to our role with the Airshed advisory, but I feel that our actions, or that there is more we can act on. The report that we just received highlighted that those closest to wood stoves are those most impacted, which, I mean, it really underscores that we have a responsibility as local government to address the fact that those who are being impacted by wood stoves are also those wood stoves are within our jurisdiction, and that means that we do have a responsibility to try and address these sources of pollution. So I look forward to bringing the motion forward next week, or I guess in January, not next week. I do have one question. This very lengthy report that was attached to our agenda package that shows those very interesting maps of wood smoke concentration back in 2017. I did skim through it, and I was surprised to learn that the objective of the study was actually just to test a cost-effective method designed to monitor levels. And what I'm curious to know is if it was in fact successful in demonstrating that this is a cost-effective method, have we or the Airshed group looked into whether or not this is measurement instruments, or I'm not exactly sure what the equipment was, but whether or not there's value in either the city or the CBRD acquiring some of what was used to provide us with this data to begin with. Because something we certainly have seen from what was presented tonight is that there is data, but there are a lot of gaps in it, like even what was provided for where the sources are as the Comox Valley as a whole. And really what we're interested in is where pollution sources are coming from within our own community. So just wondering if you could answer that as well. Thanks.
Yes, definitely. At the Regional Airshed Committee, it's one of the common points of conversation is how can we get more granular data? How can we get more detail that gives us an idea of what that distribution of concentrations may be like? So they are looking at different sensor options. What was used in 2017 was mobile monitoring. So it was actually equipment that was mounted on a vehicle and then driven around a route for a week straight. And so that kind of monitoring is not something we would do simply because that time and effort to kind of be mobile would be quite challenging. However, I think we could develop a more permanent network, and there have been discussions about how to develop a more permanent network of low-cost sensors where we could have numerous data points that would give us a good idea of what that concentration is. So we have been talking about monitoring. It just may not be mobile monitoring as was done in this particular study.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thanks for that answer.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum and Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions that I wanted to clarify with staff. We did have the resolution from Councillor McCollum, I believe it was on September 8th of 2020, regarding staff developing some bylaw responses. Has any work gone on in relation to that in terms of bylaw options, or have we primarily been addressing our efforts to the regional air quality process?
And Mr. Davidson's going to answer.
Thank you for the question. Through the acting CAO to Mayor and Council. Great question. Yes, there has been quite a bit of analysis done internally on different bylaw options. We did look at a number of different things. There are various levels of involvement required from different levels of government, depending on which way we want to go. After further review in collaboration with the CBRD, we felt it was best to work closely with them to establish a regional strategy. For that reason, we have put those efforts on hold for the time being until we see what the Airshed Committee comes out with, and we hope to work collaboratively with them.
Thanks, and I think we all support the work of the Airshed process. I think where we feel some frustration is looking for some actions that perhaps people who are adversely impacted can take in the interim while we're waiting. And to that end, what I'm wondering, our existing nuisance bylaw has a nuisance definition, and it doesn't mention wood smoke in particular, but I'm just wondering if it could be read as to include that because it reads nuisance means any activity which substantially and unreasonably interferes with a person's use and enjoyment of a highway, park, or other public area, or of land a person owns or occupies, or which causes injury to the health, comfort, or convenience of an occupier of land. And it goes on to list a number of activities, which doesn't mention wood smoke, but ends with or other objectionable situations that in law are a nuisance. I'm wondering if excessive wood smoke coming from a neighbor's chimney could be captured in that definition.
I'm happy to take that question. Thank you very much. I think staff would have to review internally and confirm, specifically looking at resources available to facilitate that definition. I think we'd have to take that back and review before we could answer that.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that there might be more work, and I believe one of Councillor Cole Hamilton's resolutions may speak to that, but it may be a tool that we can make available to the public while we're waiting for a more comprehensive strategy out of the Airshed process. Thanks.
And Ms. O'Connor wants to respond as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hillian, for the excellent question. In being the director responsible for the Bylaw Services Division, I can tell you that in all honesty, using the nuisance bylaw to deal with wood smoke would not be appropriate. In the event of something, an extreme situation where maybe you had burning of known toxic materials or something that may be doing excessive damage to a region, that could be something that council could consider taking specific action against. But considering the population within Courtenay and the magnitude of the issue, and we would have to enforce equitably upon all those who are deemed to be causing a nuisance through wood smoke. It's not something we would have the capacity to do in any potential future state of the division.
And you want to respond?
Yeah, if I could, thanks, Mayor. I appreciate that. And I do understand it. Sometimes our bylaws, the value of our bylaws is not necessarily that we enforce them, but that we actually investigate, and a dialogue takes place that brings about a behavior change. And, I know that it's a more widespread problem and it calls for a global response, but I think there are also specific incidences of some individual houses that are somewhat notorious in particular neighborhoods. We've had pictures sent to us from residents showing excessive smoke from specific places. And I guess what I'm looking for is a tool that can enable a public official to go to a particular residence and say, your neighbor has expressed concerns. Can we tell you about the possibility of getting rebates to convert to a different form of energy, or can we give you some material about proper burning practices? And that's where I'm wondering if our bylaw could be useful in the state that it's in, or if it would need more work even for that.
And back to Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Councillor Hillian. And yes, through any investigation process where the Bylaw Division receives a complaint, we do follow up, which would include having conversations with the residents. In regard to the volume, it would just depend on how many of those complaints we're getting. And it can be assumed that as awareness increases, the number of complaints would rightly increase as well, as awareness is raised within the community on whole. That's something that we would have to continue to monitor to make sure that we're able to maintain existing service levels and bylaw enforcement across the board. But I appreciate the suggestion. It's definitely something we can take into consideration.
Thanks very much.
And Councillor Moore.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I completely appreciate the regional approach and strategy. That I mean, it's important that we all collaborate and try to align as best as possible. There's probably many areas in the regional district that don't have the kind of hotspots that we have in Courtenay. People are spread out in many of areas. I'm sure there are some pockets in the regional district as well. Obviously, we've seen that Cumberland has a similar issue to us. It seems almost injurious to make people who are suffering wait for a regional approach. I mean, it must just be ludicrous to them to be suffering every night during the winter and have their kids being sick and numerous other things while we wait for a regional approach. So I'm hoping that maybe staff would be able to say, is there really anything preventing us from having some local actions, particularly to address these hotspot areas? I guess I don't see how that necessarily goes, why those things can't go hand in hand, that we still look at the overall picture and a regional approach and the things that we can align on and strategize around, but that we really address these areas that need some attention. Is that something that staff can respond to? Thanks.
Mr. Davidson.
Yes, thank you for the question. Through acting CAO to Mayor Council, there may be some options. Unfortunately, we're not prepared to speak to them tonight, but we are happy to take that back and review internally.
Thanks, Councillor Morin. And yeah, I think it's been a pretty thorough conversation, and I think which has been mentioned a couple of times before, to a certain degree, a little bit of frustration around the fact that it has been going on for quite some time. You know, we have a bunch of challenges such as the cumulative effect. So even though you might have a wood stove that is to CSA standards, is it, you know, when you have too many of them in a small area, is that going to have the impacts that we're seeing? Because again, those regulations are based on probably non-inversion locations, you know, where you have your temperature acting normally, whereas our temperature is abnormal for some reason. That's the one side. The other side, which was identified early on, was fuel source. It's been probably 5 years or more now that I first started talking to the industry that sells wood stoves to say there needs to be clean wood. And I can just speak to the first time I bought wood when I moved here. Our house came with a wood stove, went and bought some wood, was told it would be nice dry fir. It came. It was certainly not 100% fir, maybe about 20% fir and a bunch of other types of less hardwood, so to speak. And then the first time I lit it on fire, you could actually hear the water sizzling out of it because it was certainly not dry. And so having access to that dry, properly seasoned fuel is certainly a challenge. And the second thing, again, years ago now, because we had the province come here and actually present their data to us, when we talked about restricting people's ability to burn either poor wood or in a poor quality wood stove, there's real limitations on what we can do because it's what people are doing to actually heat themselves. And so it really seemed to be using the carrot versus the stick. Like, how do we get people on board? Obviously having a good source, and I haven't heard a follow-up, but hopefully the industry is still interested in doing something along those lines to get the fuel meandering in the right direction. Getting the extra monitoring stations. I know when we asked about it back in 2015, the number that was thrown around, I believe, was about $10,000 or $15,000. But I think going back to the other comment that's in report that's often referred to is that mobile one, and having even budgeting an annual one where at least we get a week or so of that annual mobile, maybe not every day or every month, but just so we can get that snapshot so that we can compare year over year on how we're doing. And yeah, and I mean, just the other day, you know, a fire was located in the bush because of people who are homeless, who that is literally their only form of heat. So trying to deal with it from that provincial housing perspective and providing those supports, weirdly for mental health and addictions, and just getting people so they're not having to live in the rough. I mean, it's such a complex conversation. So I'm very excited because I'm hearing everybody here talking about it. They're all at the regional district. And again, it has been a long time of asking for the same things, but hopefully, we're in a position where we can start to move forward on these kinds of things. So, and I do see that Councillor Cole Hamilton has another question or comment.
Yeah, actually, Mayor is going to move the recommendation. Yeah. And if it's all right afterwards, add a small modification or amendment to the recommendation. But I'll first of all move that based on the December 6th, 2021 staff report, air quality and wood smoke in the Comox Valley, Council approve option 1 and direct staff to represent the City of Courtenay at the Regional Airshed committee meetings and support the development of a regional airshed protection strategy. Send correspondence to the regional district encouraging them to adopt regulatory bylaws for the electoral areas to limit activities that contribute to poor air quality in the region. This includes bylaws limiting the installation of new wood stoves, restrictions on backyard burning, and non-agricultural or forestry related land clearing burning. And may I now propose an amendment?
Sure. Okay. And is this, have you given it to staff already? Or?
I have.
Yes. Yeah. So
yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. Thanks very much. These are just a couple of very small changes, just to acknowledge the work that has been done so far by staff. And for the first part of the resolution, where it currently says represent the City of Courtenay at the regional airshed protection strategy meetings, amend that to continue to, because I know Janine, you've been there since day one. I think that should be acknowledged rather than sounding like we're just starting to ask you to be involved. And the second is along the same lines, that to add the words continue to, and then the resolution says support the development, and also add the words and upcoming implementation of the regional airshed protection strategy. So 2 would read as amended, continue to support the development and upcoming implementation of the regional airshed protection strategy.
All right. It's been seconded. And
well, thanks. I'll make sure to do that.
Next year. Wait till next year. So, but what I was going to say is I do see some lights, but I'm assuming that's for the original motion. So can I call, do you mind if I call the question on the amendment? So on the amended motion, sorry, on the amendment for the motion, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. And then on the motion as amended, did you have any fault? You're off. So I'm going to pass it over to Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, just a question about the third point in the recommendations from the report. The recommendation is specifically around sending a letter to the electoral areas and asking them to take some actions around limiting wood smoke. What I am unclear about is why this wouldn't come out of their participation in the airshed, because I assume that they're participating in the process the same as the city, and I'm just wanting to understand what the benefit would be of us sending a letter separately if they're participating in this process the same as we are.
Were you? Oh, sorry, Ms. Tezioli, did you want to respond to the question, Mr. Davidson?
Yeah, happy to respond. Thank you very much for the question. Through acting CAO to Mayor and Council, yes, of course, the regional district is leading the Airshed committee. This just provides an opportunity for City of Courtenay to make a strong suggestion that they take action in this regard. So it's not clear at this point in time what exactly the implementation methodologies will be coming out of the Airshed committee. We just want to be clear that in our analysis, we've identified a bit of a gap in that City of Courtenay and Comox and Cumberland do have bylaws supporting this last statement here, and we feel the CVRD should as well. So we just want to be clear about that as we work to develop and finalize the strategy coming out of the Airshed committee.
Thanks for that explanation, Chris. Yeah, I do have a little bit of concern around this just because I don't want the appearance to be that the action that the city is taking is to point the finger to the rural areas that they haven't taken similar steps that we have. And there's no doubt that, burning backyard, wet backyard, spring debris makes a bunch of smoke. But I also heard in the report that, that wood smoke is coming from local sources. If your neighborhood is smelling of wood smoke, it's likely from your neighbors, not from the rural areas. So I just have a bit of hesitation, and that's the action that we're taking right now. And the only action that's coming out of this immediately would be to send a letter requesting action outside of our jurisdiction, especially if there are already participating in the Airshed process that's outlined in the first two steps of the recommendation. So I do want to express that I'm not 100% behind the third point in the recommendation. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum. And I can speak to my time dealing with this file back in the day. And so there was a couple of things. One was just to have that alignment. So throughout the whole Comox Valley, so it was one rule. So that's one thing. But to your point about the fact that, some of these properties are going to be way away from things. But when we start to look at it in terms of, especially if we start going to bylaw enforcement, it becomes a bit problematic if your neighbor on one side of you can be reported to the city of Courtenay, but because you're in a conflict area, which might be on the border of the city and the regional district, you can't report your neighbor on the other side that may actually be a bigger offender. And I think that's kind of the crux of it, especially, when you hear reports about people burning garbage and other things in their backyard. It is one of those things where it's challenging no matter how you look at it, because bylaw by its nature tends to be more reactionary. And so you are kind of relying on people to report on people who are offending. And so that's my take on it. And again, to be fair, there was certainly pushback from some rural area directors, but others were okay with it. So it just sort of, I think, depends where they were at. So Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mary. While I appreciate Councillor McCollum's point, I think it's actually a good idea for us to go on the record as encouraging these electoral areas to get into alignment. I think it gives our representatives at the table a place, a more solid ground with which to advance any arguments they might make. But I'm wondering in that regard, why we didn't include in this resolution writing to the province to suggest that they change their practices around slash burning and other industrial practices, which I believe are identified in the report that was presented today as something in the neighborhood of 44% of the problem. And whether or not there was any contemplation of that being added to the resolution on staff's part.
Thank you for the question. There was some contemplation. Unfortunately, it was viewed as being more challenging to pursue. So wanting to be concise and keep our recommendations meaningful, we opted for just the three presented at this point in time.
Sure.
Happy to consider alternatives, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I realize we're far from being finished with this topic. It sounds like we're going to have a couple of resolutions come forward at the next council meeting, and who knows? Maybe we could wrestle up a resolution that speaks to that provincial issue and go on record in relation to that as well. So, thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hillian, and our esteemed acting CAO whispered to me we do have opportunities at ABICC, UBCM as well to do that, and I would probably even go on to point out that through this Airshed group and the strategy that could be one of the strategies that come out as well, so that it is that unified voice of the whole Comox Valley saying this is what we want. So everyone's signing on to it. But I totally appreciate the idea of trying to get out there. Did you want to respond? I saw you. You're good? Okay. All right, we have an amended motion. So all those in favor of the motion as amended? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And that's about 99% of the agenda there. So that's excellent. Thanks again to staff for all your work on this file. As you can imagine, given the discussion tonight, I think most of council, if all of council is pretty passionate about it. I think it's something that our community is passionate about. So, so for anybody who's watching out there, read the report. It is very insightful. So thanks again for that. And we'll get into reports and updates from council members. And we're going to go in reverse order today. Councillor Theos. Excellent. Councillor Moore.
Thank you.
Excellent. You're welcome. Councillor McCollum. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll just acknowledge that today I took part in the 32nd commemoration of the Montreal massacre, where 14 women who were engineering students were gunned down by an individual who stated that he hated feminists. And it's become a flashpoint in Canadian history that's made a huge impact on our country. Of course, the issue of violence against women has not necessarily improved, and it was a very, very moving event, standing in the snow outside the art gallery with a number of other people to acknowledge that we cannot forget that event, and that the work both on an individual basis and collectively to address violence against women and children continues on a day-to-day basis. I also wanted to acknowledge that in the coming week or two, I'll be facilitating a meeting involving members of our accessibility committee and city staff with staff from the regional library board with regards to the design of the new library, and court needed to ensure that washroom accessibility and other aspects related to inclusion are factored into the design and build. So, and thanks to Councillor Theos and Regional Director Arbor for putting me in touch with the chair of the library board in relation to that. Thank you.
So thanks very much, Councillor Hillian and Councillor Cole Hamilton. Oh, Councillor Frisch, geez. Jumping around here. That's what happens when I'm going backwards. I'm doing the best I can. But Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, no, I also just wanted to thank the Transition Society for hosting that today. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it, but thank Councillor Hillian for being there for the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. So thanks.
Excellent. Thanks for that. And Councillor Cole Hamilton. All right. Well, there we go. That was good. Yeah, so a couple of things that have happened over the last little bit is we had a elected officials forum on mobility where we talked about transit in the Comox Valley. I think most of us were there, and obviously all elected officials from across the Comox Valley. Mike Zabarski did I think a pretty good job of explaining where we're at, where we're going. There's folks from various different places within the Comox Valley, and obviously it's a partnership with BC Transit, but it was a great conversation. And we also had the launch of the coldest night of the year, which is coming up in a few months. So people can now start signing up for their teams and donating money. And that goes again to the Transition Society and Dawn to Dawn, which does amazing work for those that are living on the streets or in transition. And so I just want to acknowledge that. We had the Christmas parade, that was yesterday. And for those that are wondering why I'm very bright today, it's because this would have worked through the parade. And unfortunately, although I probably muttered it under my breath for the rest of council, I'd hoped that more would shown up, but obviously an email would have been probably more effective. But I just want to acknowledge this is our last meeting before Christmas. And finally, last night we had the menorah lighting at City Hall, where we had Rabbi Bensi from Nanaimo, who comes up every year and provides an event for the Jewish community to come together and connect and celebrate. I want to acknowledge Councillor Hillian, who's been there many years. As well as we had Mayor Baird from Cumberland and Chair Kettler of the Comox Valley Regional District there. And we also had Councillor Jonathan Kerr from Comox attended as well. So just want to appreciate everybody who came out to support the Jewish community. And with that, we'll move on to resolutions of council. Councillor Chris was the first one, so you're doing really good tonight.
Yeah,
so
I'll move that a special in-camera meeting close to the public will be held December 6th, 21 at the conclusion of the regular council meeting pursuant to the following subsections of the community charter. And those are 90 subsection 1 subsection C, labor relations, and 90 subsection 1 subsection D, the security of property of municipality.
Okay, it's been second. Any questions or comments regarding that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And getting back through, I believe we are back to bylaws. I don't think there's any new business. Do we not have fees and charges? I think we jumped to third reading, I think. So I think we have to jump in at 12.1.1. And I do have Councillor Moore.
Great, thanks, Mayor. I'll move that the City of Courtenay fees and charges amendment bylaw number 3055, 2021, which is the 2022 water user fees, pass, a bylaw to amend City of Courtenay fees and charges bylaw number 1673, 1992 to amend the water user fees for 2022, pass first, second, and third reading.
Excellent. That's been moved and seconded. And for council's benefit, we do have Ms. Annie Berard here, Manager of Financial Planning, Payroll and Business Performance. So if there's any questions, we'll make them very difficult if possible. And with that, I will pass it over to Councillor, it's jumping around on me here, Councillor Hilliard.
Well, Mayor, I would thank you. I was just going to say that I think it's been very noteworthy of Ms. Berard to sit here through this entire meeting for this section. I don't expect she's going to get any questions. So I just wanted to offer that note of appreciation.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hillian. But in all seriousness, I do appreciate you being here, just in case there are some niggly little things that we need to sort out. But I don't see any further questions or comments. So with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And 12.1.2, Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Okay, Mayor, I'll move that City of Courtenay fees and charges amendment bylaw number 3056, 2021, a bylaw to amend City of Courtenay fees and charges bylaw number 1673, 1992 to amend the sanitary sewer user fees for 2022, receive first, second, and third reading.
Excellent. That's been moved and seconded. And again, are there any questions or comments regarding that? Seeing none. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hillian.
I'm just ready for the next one.
Oh. All right, we'll leave it on. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And 12.1.3.
Mayor, I'll move that City of Courtenay fees and charges amendment bylaw number 3057, 2021, a bylaw to amend City of Courtenay fees and charges bylaw number 1673, 1992 to amend the solid waste collection user fees for 2022, pass first, second, and third reading.
Excellent. That's been moved and seconded. And Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. Just quickly, I wanted to give my appreciation to the Finance Department because we had been talking for years about moving this process up in the air and making it more beneficial for not only us as council, but for others in the community and opportunity to do business a little more earlier in the year, especially when we're going for contracts. So really appreciate that coming to fruition. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I think Ms. Nelson might be out there still in cyberspace. I'm not too sure. And so she was a strong proponent of this and has, I think, worked really hard to make sure that that we are on the schedule that we are. So given the fact that we have COVID and floods and fires and all the other things that seem to distract us from time to time. So thanks very much, Councillor Frisch, for that acknowledgement. And with that, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. That leaves one thing. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's 100%. And I hope everybody has a nice festive time over the